So many of you have joined already. We will begin, and we will welcome those who are still arriving. You're very welcome to this Season of Creation webinar. My name is Cliona Sharkey. I'm the Director of Advocacy and European Programmes with the Global Catholic Climate Movement, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. Before we get started, importantly, we're going to explain the interpretation channels for you. So, if you wish to follow in Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, or Polish, look at the bottom of your screen and find the interpretation icon. When you find the interpretation icon, select the language you wish to follow. Importantly, for Italian, you must select Japanese, and for Polish, you must select Russian. You see the interpretation icon shown here at the bottom of your screen. Select the language you wish to follow. For Polish, you must select Russian, and for Italian, you must select Japanese. Importantly, we also invite you to mute the original language so that you do not hear two languages at the same time, which will be very confusing. When you have selected your language, at the bottom of your screen, you should see the flag for the language you have selected. So you see here the Spanish flag for the Spanish channel. And again, for Polish, it will be Russian flag, and for Italian, it will be Japanese. We have our support team in the chat box. If you have problems with the interpretation channels or any technical issues, please feel free to write in your own language in the chat box, and someone will support you. So, you're most welcome to the Season of Creation webinar, where today we're focusing on Europe. A just transition in and by Europe, Europe's responsibility to its people and to the world. And as I said, my name is Cliona Sharkey. I'm the Director of Advocacy and European Programmes with GCCM, and I will be your moderator today. So the Season of Creation webinar today is being hosted by GCCM together with CIDSE. And we're going to, in this webinar, reflect and exchange on Europe's responsibilities to its people and to the world in the context of the global pandemic and in the context of the climate and wider ecological emergency. And we need look no further than the inspiration of the encyclical Laudato Si to appreciate the interconnectedness of these crises, the social and ecological crises that are unfolding before us. The Season of Creation is an inspiring and energizing time to pray, to reflect, and to act. And it is fitting that we come in this way together to consider these crises in an interconnected way and to respond to them in a holistic way. So not only are we going to hear from these experts on their analysis, we're going to reflect on what we can do to contribute to the change we seek. We will hear from our selection of experts on what can and must change if we are truly to transition to a safe and just future and not return to the mistaken and dangerous policies and practices that brought us to where we are today. And we will be sharing concrete actions that you can take during this Season of Creation to live Laudato Si. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers for you. I'm delighted to welcome and thank them for being here with us. We have Sister Smerelli from the Vatican COVID Commission joining us from Rome. We have Marcin Kedzierski from the Jagiellonian Club in Poland. We have Lydia Machaka from CIDSE joining us from South Africa today. And we have Edwin Mumbere from the Centre for Citizens Conserving in Uganda. We will have some questions and answers before we wrap up. You're most welcome throughout the session to put your questions in your own language in the Q&A box, the questions and answer box that you will find at the bottom of your screen. We would invite you to specify who you are asking your question to. We obviously won't have time to answer all of the questions, but our speakers will try to answer some of the questions in the chat box as we go along, and we will select a number of the questions to respond to in the Q&A session. Also, just to note that Sister Smerilli will not be able to stay for the question and answer session at the end, but we do invite you to address questions to her, and she has prolific work available, and we will be very happy to provide any materials to you with her support after the webinar to respond and provide you with information that you're interested in that Sister Smerilli might cover in her presentation. So before I invite our first speaker, Sister Smerilli, I would like to invite one of our Laudato Si animators, one of our community leaders from Italy, Silvia Congedo, to lead us in an opening prayer, to guide us and bring us to a peaceful and quiet place for our reflections today.
Creator of life, at your word, the earth brought forth plants yielding seeds and trees of every kind bearing fruit. The rivers, mountains, minerals, seas, and forests sustain life. The eyes of the whole look to you to safety the needs of every living thing. And through time the earth has sustained life. Throughout the planetary cycle of days and seasons, renewal and growth, you open your hand to the gifted creatures, our food in the proper time. In your wisdom, you're granted, you granted a Sabbath, a blessed time to rest in gratitude for all that you have given, a time to liberate yourself from vicious consumption, a time to allow the land and all creators to rest from the burden of production. But these days our living pushes the planet beyond its limits. Our demands for growth and your never-ending cycle of production and consumption are exhausting. The forests are leaking, the topsoil erodes, the fields fail, the desert advances, the season, I'm sorry, acidify, the storm intensify. We have not allowed Can you change the page, please? During this season of creation, we ask grant us courage to observe a Sabbath for our planet. Bring in us with the faith to trust in your promise. Inspire us with the creativity to share that we have been given. Teach us to be satisfied with enough. And as we proclaim a joy for the earth. Send your Holy Spirit to renew the face of creation. In the name of the one you come to proclaim good news to all creation, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Sylvia. A beautiful prayer for season of creation. I would like to invite Sister Smirelli to speak. Sister Smirelli is a professor of economics at the Pontifical Academy of Educational Sciences. She is a member of the scientific board and organizer of the Social Weeks of Catholics in Italy, and she is currently the coordinator of the Vatican COVID-19 Commission Economics Task Force. Sister Smirelli, it's a pleasure to have you with us today, and we invite you to share your screen and begin your presentation.
Hello to everybody. Can you see the screen? Yes. Thank you. First of all, thank you for this kind invitation. And I'm very happy to be here today to discuss with all of you, with these distinguished panelists, about these crucial topics. I was asked and I was tasked the hard job to present the Vatican perspective. I don't know if you know that in March, last March, Pope Francis established the Vatican COVID Commission. It wasn't intended as a commission for the emergency, but instead it was a commission made in order to think about the social and economic and ecological consequences of the pandemic. And so therefore I decided to start with this quote that I find particularly inspiring. Pope Francis said, "One does not emerge from a crisis the same as before. The pandemic is a crisis. We emerge from a crisis either better or worse than before. Is it up to us to choose? So we can choose. We don't believe to that narrative. We can make a better world. Everything will be equal. Pope Francis says it cannot be equal. It's up to us to choose what we are going to do. So our motto, the motto Pope Francis has given to us, is prepare the future. And so this Vatican COVID Commission, as you can see on the website of the Commission, is a section of Human Development Dicastery. There are 5 working groups in this commission. The first one is related to the help to the local churches for the emergencies. The second one, the one in which I'm working, is a working group of analysis and reflections. And there are 4 task forces into that group: ecology, economics, health, and security, food security, cyber security, peace building, and so on. And we are working together. In order to make some concrete proposals. Pope Francis said, concretezza, asked us to be concrete, because we need to go deeper into the analysis, but the results should be some concrete proposals. So the pandemic, which is a common enemy, has brought out at an experiential level the importance of common good. As Pope Francis reminds us, no one can do it alone. We can face a common and global enemy only if we understand that we are all linked each other. A humanity with a common destiny. We can only succeed with everyone's commitments. The COVID-19 crisis has started as a health crisis, as we know, but we know that health is a global commons, and prevention and care services must be global as well. In particular, global health must be considered common good in the sense that everyone has an equal right to it, but also an equal responsibility to promote it. And we see that this crisis reveals profound inequalities within and among countries for what concerns the right to health. The scale and gravity of the pandemic has overwhelmed even well-resourced healthcare systems. Then this crisis rapidly became an economic and social crisis, with some countries that have entered this crisis in a much weaker economic position, with struggling economies and already high level of debt. If the challenges are huge in advanced economies, they are enormously more daunting in developing ones and for the more vulnerable groups. I'm thinking, for example, about informal workers, those, for example, employed in agriculture sector with no social guarantees, migrant workers who became even more invisible during the crisis, the young generations that is paying the highest price for the increasing stability of the labor market. So, as I said, the COVID-19 Commission, governed by Pope Francis, has this mission to do and to think things differently, moving away from old structures and old paradigm of development. As the Pope said, the crisis gives us the opportunity to build something different. And this, so as I said, is our motto: prepare the future which is different to be prepared for the future. We are not waiting for the future. We should do something now for the future. So the future is not already determined, and we don't have just to passively accept it. So we have the right and the duty to do something. And here, the one word of the title of this webinar is important: responsibilities. So the program covered the issue of Europe's responsibilities, and there are responsibilities. As COVID Commission, we produced some executive summaries about some particular topics. One of them was about Europe and the just transition. And here I'd like to say just some highlights and some proposals we made, simple proposals for the EU. First of all, of course, but we are seeing that Europe is demonstrating that we are having vision on this regard. So prioritize the European Green Deal. And we see that this is important also as a kind of investments we are going to do starting from now, I say. But we think that in line with the idea of an integral conversion, the interconnected spheres of ecology, health, economy, and others must be addressed together. As Laudato Si, as we read in the Laudato Si number 139, it is no longer possible to find a specific, discrete answer for each part of the problem. It is essential to seek comprehensive solutions which consider the interaction with the natural system themselves and with social systems. So, for example, another option for Europe, and we are asking for it, is to incorporate into the mandate of the European Central Bank a full employment target alongside the price stability target. Now is the time to change something in this regard. So, as is the case with the US Federal Reserve, to incorporate the objective of full employment among the target of European Central Bank. But the third important topics and responsibility for Europe is linked to the ecological debt. So we know that the richest quarter of the world population accounts for more than 3/4 of consumption of many natural resources, raw materials, goods, and so on. We have empirical evidence. I'm reading some papers on that, some scientific papers, in which they demonstrate that the ecological unequal exchange among the in the world is persistent from 1990 and 2015. So it's a path, it's not something related to a moment in the time. So we need to do something to address these topics, because industrialized countries have developed their economies by emitting far more than their fair share of greenhouse gases and exploiting natural resources that are most located in developing countries. So we speak about external debt, but we have to say something also on the ecological debt. We are in debt. As Europe, we are in debt. So as the Laudato Si says, a true ecological debt exists, particularly between the global north and south, connected to commercial imbalances with effects on the environment, and the disproportionate use of natural resources by certain countries over long periods of time. And on the other side, developing countries continue to fuel this aggressive industrialization, and at the same time they suffer the most negative consequences. Just to say something about that, this slide focuses only on one consequence of aggressive industrializations. Clearly, aggressive industrializations has many negative effects. Here, I just want to focus on effect on health, which is quite impressive. So there is the future to build, to shape that needs necessary to take in account the future generations, as they are those who will pay the price of this debt. And we have a responsibility towards them above all. But finally, because you asked me to say something about best practices, I'd like to say something about what we are doing. As an example, as Vatican COVID Commission, we are following an important project, Italian project, named Laudato Si Garden. It's a joint project launched by 7 municipalities in the north of Italy and the Delta del Po, the river Po. it was built to concretely respond to Pope Francis' call on integral and sustainable development. These 7 measures, they read together the Laudato Si. They are from different colors, different parties, and they committed themselves to create a path of an economic development aligned with the Laudato Si objectives and principles. So they are going to build an economic models based on peace, harmony, and biodiversity. And for this occasion, a kind of living chapel will be there in this garden, and we see it as an example of how Laudato Si can become concrete. I'm also involved in the social weeks of Italian Catholics, and we are preparing a session named The Planet We Wish For, and we are collecting good practices in Italy from majors, from business people, from the churches, local churches, and we want to learn each other from the best practices we have in Italy. And at the end, least but not last, I think I'm also following the Economy of Francesco project, and 2,000 young people are working to make concrete proposals. The event will be held in November from 19th to 21st of November, completely online, and young people divided into 12 villages, thematic villages, are presenting their proposals to the Pope, and I think it will be important to follow also these young people. So I finished because I think I spoke too much, and I thank you for listening and for inviting me, and I hope we can do something concrete and we can participate in this action towards a better future, the future we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Smirelli. You were invited to give us a global perspective, which you did beautifully. Sister Smirelli, thank you for this global perspective and for sharing the work and the analysis of the Vatican COVID Commission. I really appreciated some of the concrete examples you gave of what the Vatican is proposing in relation to full employment and the central bank. I also really appreciated the examples at the national level. I think it's important to know what can be done that pursues this kind of holistic response that can be done at national and local levels. So this is wonderful leadership from the municipalities in Italy. I also really appreciated your how you explained so well this this global justice perspective and the idea of this ecological debt from the global north to the global south, and that in a very holistic way, both within Europe and globally, that we will not come out of this crisis, these interconnected crises, if we do not do so fairly within Europe and fairly globally, taking into account this ecological debt. So thank you so much for that. I might ask you to comment if you would maybe say one word on how you think things are going so far. So for example, I read just the other day a report by the Bloomberg New Energy Finance organization that said only 1% of the $12 trillion that have been pledged to response to COVID have been spent, can be considered green. And I just wondered if you might comment very briefly on that, how you compare to this analysis of what could and should be done from the Vatican Commission's perspective, as compared to what is happening currently in practice in the COVID response.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
As a COVID commission, we are integrating now. Somebody said you are kind of a startup because we started in a way, and we are seeing that we need something more. We are growing, and we are establishing now regional commissions. We are trying to build a connection and to have a deeper knowledge of regional perspectives, and so we can follow that. And we are working by following some concrete project, and from each project we are learning something, and our aim, and in this concrete project, for example, we have a project aimed to reach 500 among the biggest CEOs around the world, and we are having webinar with them, discussing and trying to bring this perspective to them. We are working on the agenda of G20, trying to say something about that. We are working with FAO, and we are following the project of Food Coalition, and so this is a biggest level. One of our aim is also to monitor, to do something in order to see how the money will arrive, can be spent in a way in which is compatible with the Laudato Si principles, for example. So not only green, but also social issues, justice, the perspective of the poor. And we have somebody working on the, the metrics. How can we evaluate the measures governments are taking and so on? So, but, and we are working with international partners. We are not doing this by ourselves, but we are asking people, and if in this group there are people interested in, and people who provided already some ideas, metrics, in order to measure the way in which the money will be spent, it would be interesting to do something and to make it known to the audience, to international audience and businesses, but also politicians, this vision and this kind of way of saying, we are here, we are monitoring what you are doing, and we say, look, this, for example, is not right for the perspective of the poorest, and so on.
Thank you so much for that, Sister Smirelli. It's very, it's reassuring and it's inspiring to know that the Vatican Commission has big plans, both to continue the global work and to bring that work to the local level, also to follow these policies, practices and investments, to monitor where they're going. That's wonderful to hear. So I thank you so much for your time with us, Sister Smirelli, and you're so welcome to stay with us for as long as you can. Thank you. As I said, if there are questions to Sister Smirelli in the Q&A box, we will seek to follow up with everyone afterwards with some of Sister Smirelli's work, so that you can read more about the work that she's doing. Thank you, Sister. So we're going to move from this global perspective to our next expert, Marcin Kadierski from the Jagiellonian Club in Poland. Marcin, you're very welcome. Marcin, the Jagiellonian Club in Poland, it's an analysis center, a Polish center. It's a non-partisan association combining features of an educational institution and think tank and a citizens movement. Marcin is very well known for his work with the Jagiellonian Club, and he became very well known during the COVID times for blogs that he was writing on EU and national policy issues and responses to the COVID crisis. We're delighted to have him here today to share his analysis and insights and ideas. So Marcin is going to speak to us, giving us reflections on the EU side of the situation, but also from a national perspective, using Poland as an example. Marcin, you're very welcome, and I invite you to unmute and to bring us your presentation.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation for such important and interesting debate. Actually, the COVID-19 pandemic caused unprecedented crisis in the modern history. Due to its scale and scope, it is incomparable to the previous crisis. The lockdown introduced in many countries, some were softer, some were harder, had an impact not only on the economic activity, but also on the people's mindset. To some extent, it might be called from Greek the word metanoia. It led many of us, politicians, experts, academics, business people, and individual workers to rethinking of our modus vivendi or modus operandi. It is definitely too early to assume whether this change is profound and lasting. We have to be aware that after the great crisis of 2008, many have predicted that the world would never be the same as before. It is true that the economics as a science has significantly changed. We have introduced many heterodox approaches into the so-called academic mainstream. But in fact, we haven't seen any positive revolution in the real economy. The financialization of the economy that reached a total dangerous level in 2008, in the second decade of the 21st century has even increased, despite the social, economic, and political turbulences. The economic inequalities have increased as well. Therefore, I would be really cautious in predicting a positive revolution, especially bearing in mind that the ongoing digital revolution will probably push us to the even stronger accumulation of capital and, as a matter of fact, the accumulation of power. The COVID crisis shown us very clearly who is going to benefit. See, for instance, what happened to the companies such as Amazon, Google, or Facebook during the crisis. And what does it mean for us and our debate? Let me make one introductory assumption. I present as you said, the European perspective, the perspective of the most developed part of the world. The governments, the decision makers now are aware that they must react differently and much more actively than they did after the great crisis of 2008. The last crisis led many countries to even bigger problems. See what happened to Greece after 2010. In fact, due to the austerity, the indebtedness of Greece paradoxically rose due to the GDP decline, because the indebtedness is a relative figure, not an absolute one. And fortunately, the governments took the lesson from the previous crisis, and instead of the so-called great austerity, We are now observing rather a helicopter money strategy that, at least in the short run, may prevent us from recession and unemployment. I'm not an advocate of the modern monetary theory, but still I'm strongly convinced that we cannot compare the public government budget to the household budget. There is one fundamental difference. The state can indirectly, through the monetary policy channel and the national central banks, it can issue money, while the households can't do that. And the public debt is measured in a relative, as I said, not in absolute terms. And moreover, we rather don't have to worry about the uncontrolled rise of inflation, as the previous speaker said. And however, we can't forget that sooner or later, also because of the cost of the interest for the budgets, we'll have to repay that debt. It won't be financed in 100% only by the GDP growth, although the so-called GDP channel will definitely have a great importance. And as a matter of fact, the governments and the EU as well will focus on the GDP, even if they are aware that this indicator might lead us to the unsustainable growth. It means that the governments, to a great extent, will be determined by the logic of the GDP growth. Of course, there are other goals to follow. We see it very clearly at the European level. Let me remind that 37%, that is the recent decision, 37% of all funds in the Next Generation EU, the huge program that amounts to 750 billion of euros, should be spent on green investments in the new Green Deal. But concurrently, 20% has to be spent on the digital revolution and the new technologies. And actually, nobody is speaking about divestment or no growth strategy because of the need for the GDP growth to repay the debt. I don't have insight into the national recovery plans in the other EU member states, but when I look at the draft of the Polish National Recovery Plan, I see their investments in biotechnology, in space industry, and in microelectronics. I don't see programs dedicated, for instance, towards the stability of the labor market, although the plan is still open and the people may apply with their projects. I might be wrong, but I think that the logic or the philosophy that stays behind these particular projects in biotechnologies, space industries, and so on, is based on the current logic of production and consumption. Of course, we are looking for a greener energy, but we want to produce better, we want to produce more efficiently, and we want to produce more. And being honest, I don't believe that the ruling philosophy of development will change, at least in the top-down approach. I don't blame the politicians for that. I'm fully aware that they must think about the stability of the system, which means, for instance, the stability of provision and financing of different public services. And every revolution is very risky, also in the political terms in the next elections. Moreover, there are many business groups of interest that will strengthen that logic of growth and production and consumption, especially when the EU member states have to spend so huge amount of money for investments before the end of 2022. So they have 2 years, and if you have so much money that are to be spent in so short period of time, you are looking for partners that has capacity to do so. And it is hard to avoid a situation when the companies will make a greenwashing of the investments. Okay, but as I understand, we didn't meet here to complain, but rather to look for some solutions, some concrete actions, what the Pope Francis was calling for. And thus my answer from the perspective of the Catholic social teaching is following. Although the states have a great responsibility in the introduction of the economia civile, the concept mentioned by Benedict XVI in the Caritas in Veritate, and the care for the integral human development, the concept introduced by Pope Paul VI. But the states always use the logic of coercion, not the logic of freedom and the logic of love that are represented respectively by the market, which is the logic of freedom, and the society, the logic of love. And the states are liable on the influence of different interest groups. And I don't want to be naive. We are not able to make a top-down political revolution. It is also, in my opinion, not a Catholic answer. As I read the John Paul II, the Benedict XVI, the Pope Francis, and as I read the Paul's letter to the Romans, hints that were presented there, they are rather suggesting the bottom-up approach. So in the first step, we should rather change the mindset of individual actors at the market and in the society. So not only customers, but also companies and their managers. Concurrently, we should apply with our projects proposals for public programs, such as the Next Generation EU and the national recovery plans in the EU member states. Projects that implement different logic of development. The more projects we propose, the bigger chance to realize them and to raise the probability of the political revolution made from the bottom, not from the top. These projects should, in my opinion, focus on three issues. Firstly, democratization of energy production. Secondly, bringing more sustainability to the labor market. And thirdly, communalization of education, where the education system is rather a network of education communities that gathers all members of the local communities, not only children and youth, but also adults and the elderly. All these three issues might be covered under the umbrella of the concept of what I'm calling a new family policy, because I believe that only family, not the state itself, can bring the revolution of love to the world. And in conclusion, coming to the end of my short speech, it does not mean that we as Catholics should resign, or Christians should resign from influencing the public debate and the political decisions. But in my opinion, we should forget that the real change cannot be achieved only top-down and without systematic work of the strong social institutions that can infiltrate the logic of freedom represented by the market and the logic of coercion represented by the state with the logic of love and solidarity. The most important social institution that actually examines this logic of love and solidarity is family. Family is the school of love and communion. Therefore, I would argue for rethinking our public policies and bring the family to the center of our public policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcin, for that incredibly insightful input. Again, I really appreciated the very concrete suggestions, those three suggestions around democratization of energy production, sustainability of the labour market, and education communities. Something really struck me from your input that related to what Sister Smirelli said. She said that we, as Pope Francis has said, we will either come out of these crises better or worse. And I was really struck by your opening that will the change from these current interlocking crises be profound and lasting or not? And we know from experience in 2008 that it is not the case that we will for sure see the changes that are needed. And we look at the finance, you mentioned the EU budget and where money was going. When we look at where money is going, it says very concretely the direction that things are taking. So I also welcome very much your emphasis on the need for bottom-up action, social action, in order to infiltrate and really bring about change. So I think that's very fitting for some of the future discussion. I'd like to move us now to the next stage of our webinar. So from these global and European policy perspectives, we want to move to the global justice angle, and who better to bring us into this space than Pope Francis himself. So we'd like to share with you the Pope's prayer intention released on the 31st of August, on the eve of season of creation, in which he speaks so eloquently to this issue of global ecological debt.
Estamos exprimiendo los bienes del planeta, exprimiéndolos, como si fuera una naranja. Países y empresas del norte se han enriquecido explotando dones naturales del sur, generando una deuda ecológica. ¿Quién va a pagar esta deuda? Además, la deuda ecológica se agranda cuando multinacionales hacen fuera de sus países lo que no se les permite hacer en los suyos. Es indignante. Hoy, no mañana, hoy, tenemos que cuidar la creación con responsabilidad. Recemos para que los bienes del planeta no sean saqueados, sino que se compartan de manera justa y respetuosa. No al saqueo, sí al compartir.
Powerful message from Pope Francis. And we'll come back to the Pope's prayer intention again at the end. Thank you again so much, Marcin, for joining us today. We really appreciate you sharing your insights and ideas with us. We're going to move on now to Lydia Machaca. Lydia Machaca, Ana Paula, if you'd like to, yes, thank you so much. Lydia Machaca is the Climate Justice and Energy Officer with CIDSE. CIDSE is a family of Catholic social justice agencies based in Brussels, but Lydia joins us from South Africa today. Lydia is going to speak to us about the EU's global responsibilities in relation to climate action and corporate regulation. Lydia, you're most welcome, and I invite you to start sharing your screen.
Thank you everyone for having me, and I'm going to share my screen. All right, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you today. As you have heard, my name is Lydia Machaca, and today I would like to start my presentation by emphasizing that climate change remains one of the major challenges facing humanity today. As we have heard, that the health pandemic has recently begun, but it is also important that there has been a lasting climate crisis that has caused an emergency that needs urgent response. Even His Holiness, the Pope Francis, has said climate change is a global problem with negative implication on the environment, social and economic, and also at the same time political implication, particularly also on how goods are distributed across nations. It represents one of the primary challenges that we are facing today. My apologies, I just wanted to tell you today I will be talking on this subject, how integrated the climate and the health crisis is. And I'll talk about systemic power imbalances, the role of corporations, and also EU's responsibility to the world. As they've said earlier on, I would like us to really focus on that slide to really emphasize that, as we have seen lately, science does really tell us that countries are supposed to reduce their carbon emissions rapidly to reach 1.5 degrees target in this century. And current policies that are put in place globally to address climate change are currently not on track. As you can see on the slides, there is an orange line in the middle that shows that the way policies are designed, they do not meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. This means that rapid, very ambitious actions needed to be taken. And this really happens simply because, you know, the science is there and it has been communicated over the years. However, there is lack of political will. I also wanted to highlight that because of this, we have seen global temperatures increasing, and I'm sure those who are in Europe could attest that last year, Europe actually experiences one of the warmest years in record since 2000. And this is really not normal at all. And we have also witnessed in other parts of the world, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa or Southern Africa, where many countries, for example, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Mozambique have been experiencing floods. And we have also seen unusual hot weathers also in Australia, where there has been bushfires. So this is not only a problem that affects Europe only, but it's also spread, but most importantly, unequally distributed across the world. That is something that I would like to emphasize. So I would like us to really understand, as some of you might know, that damage to this environment that is causing this increasing rise in temperatures are caused by the global carbon emissions that are caused by growing unsustainable economic fossil fuel energy, and also, more importantly, large-scale food production systems. So science indicate that the global emissions must significantly decrease by at least 7% until, let me say 7% yearly until the end of this century. And this means that we must not continue on a business as usual trajectory. And really the next few years in these decades are probably going to be the most important in human history. I wanted to say most importantly that particularly the year 2020 is very crucial for the future of the climate agenda. I wanted to also emphasize that this year, countries are supposed to submit and enhance their national commitment, which they are called national, or NDCs, they're called nationally determined contributions. These pledges are supposed to be submitted this year, particularly even this month. And I think out of 195 signatory of the Paris Agreement, only 7 countries have submitted their NDCs, their national pledges. And this include Marshall Islands, Suriname, Norway, Maldives, Japan, Singapore, and Chile. And together they contribute to only 2.8% of the global emissions. So countries or nations are really running behind. So to achieve this transition, it is very important that everyone recognizes, including the scientists and communities on the ground, that we need collective effort to achieve just transition to a low carbon pathway. However, there is an ongoing debate on how to ensure that the move or the shift from fossil fuels to clean and renewable energy sources to stay below 1.5 degrees temperature goal does not leave anyone or any individual behind. So this is because today's energy systems are highly commodified and exclusive and primarily controlled by most large corporations, as the previous speaker has said, that puts profits or maybe the GDP in front of the well-being of people and the planet. So at the same time, I wanted to emphasize that it is important not to leave everyone behind, and therefore there should be no worker who is faced with a choice to choose either to work to earn livelihood or destroying the environment. A just transition requires a comprehensive approach that initiates both economic and societal transformation that involves multiple stakeholders and provides a more socially inclusive, decentralized, I think the previous speaker talked about a bottom-up approach, and participatory community-owned energy system that ensure universal access and ends energy poverty and social inequality in the current society that we live. So, although this should be centered on meaningful social dialogue that may involve comprehensive retirement plans, so just this is to make sure that no one is left behind. This should also include workers' compensation or social security programs, as well as providing adequate training when there is a shift to the new sector of renewables. So therefore, transitioning is not just important because it's morally right or morally fair to do so, but it will also ensure that we engage those who are negatively impacted by this shift, and because everybody at the same time has the right to clean air and health, which is part of achieving the sustainable goals. I wanted us to move to the next slide and just indicate especially the role of companies or what happens when companies undermine human rights. And this is an example of Samarco mining dam in Mariana in Brazil. In 2015, this dam burst in the municipality of Mariana, and millions of cubics of iron mining tailings from the mine operated by the company Samarco created a flood that destroyed the entire village, including schools, churches, and contaminated the Gualaco do Norte and Camo and Doce rivers. So it is very important that to highlight that irresponsible companies that increasingly act in violation of human rights and continue to increase violence and suffering of people of the planet needs to be held accountable. And there are other examples that we have also seen recently out in other parts of the world. For example, recently where we noticed a huge explosion of a pesticide firm that burst and caused a huge explosion in Lebanon. And most recently also in Africa, in Madagascar, we saw a huge oil spillage that is now threatening the marine life. So I wanted to jump straight into some of the recommendations or concrete proposals that we would like to put forward, and I hope this should encourage everyone to be able to know how to address the climate crisis together with the COVID or the health crisis. So as we do understand that justice and equity concerns are expressed in the Paris Agreement, particularly by the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and capabilities, which acknowledge the disparities between developed and developing countries regarding their respective historical contribution to the global greenhouse emission, and underline a fair share of responsibility in addressing climate change. I wanted to highlight that we recently have noticed an announcement that the EU target has now increased to 60% for reducing carbon emissions, and we welcome that. At the same time, we also hope for more ambitious targets in order to inspire other nations to increase their carbon emissions. But we also notice that we should not only focus on targets alone, but there should be climate policies that include concrete plans that will ensure this transition to 100 renewable energy systems, because currently there is no clarity in terms of that besides the temperature target. At the same time, we know that the EU green recovery measures should align with the COVID-19 responses, the Paris Agreement demands, and the Sustainable Development Agenda that is guided by science and equity, and while integrating and promoting democracy, justice, inclusivity, supporting multilateralism, gender responsibility, environmental integrity, and the respect for diversity and human rights. I'm saying so because we have been carefully studying the European Green Deal, and we notice that there is inconsistencies between those political processes. There's no coherence. And second, but not last, we have also noticed that the new mandatory due diligence regulation on human rights and environment will be launched next year in 2021. So this presents an opportunity, or a good opportunity, for the European Union to step up by introducing effective and robust legislation that will establish cross-sectional mandatory human rights, environment, and governance due diligence for all companies to improve access to courts for people that are affected by human rights violation, to hold them accountable for damages they have caused. So we do see this as an interesting and very good step in the right direction. And one thing, we were also expecting to have the EU summit earlier this year. Unfortunately, it was cancelled, but this presents an opportunity to, particularly on the EU and Africa partnerships and strategy, to reset the partnership that EU has had with Africa to advance the common climate and energy agenda.
Thank you so much, Lydia, for that presentation. It's just, you've managed to cover a huge amount. We really appreciate that. And what's really struck me again is there's a wonderful continuity in a lot of the points that our speakers have been making. Something you said, Lydia, really struck me, that we are in probably the most important years in human history. And you mentioned that, you know, we are in the decade in which we must reduce emissions by at least 50% in less than 10 years. That's quite staggering. And as you said, governments and their commitments, their NDCs, their climate commitments, they are not on track. They're just not taking this seriously. And I think it's great that you mentioned the EU, and that we've seen the European Parliament supporting this increase to 60%. And we're waiting to see the Commission and the Council catch up with that level of ambition, but even that is not in line with the science. So we can see how far we have yet to go. I also really welcomed your input on a just transition. And I think that will follow really importantly to Edwin's presentation on the crude oil pipeline in East Africa. People should not have to choose between a decent livelihood, a decent job, and an income for their family, or climate and ecological safety. So that is something that we have to bear in mind in our own societies and globally. What is the EU and what are European companies doing to support countries that must see economic growth to enable their people to live decent livelihoods, and not distract with dangerous investments and projects that promise jobs and economic growth, but that will lead to ecological destruction. So thank you so much, Lydia, for your input with us today. And I'd like to move us on now to Edwin, our final speaker. Edwin Mumbere is the coordinator for Centre for Citizens Conserving and the president of SafeLight, a consortium of organizations in Uganda that has helped to increase the use of renewable energy in homes across the country. He has been campaigning on fossil fuels in the area for about 6 years, and he's going to speak to us today about plans in East Africa for a new fossil fuel mega project, the crude oil pipeline that will cut across Uganda and Tanzania, led by European companies. Edwin, we're very grateful to you for your time today, and we invite you to begin sharing your screen and giving us your presentation.
For this, I'm Edwin Mumbere, the coordinator for Center for Citizens Conserving from Uganda. The pipeline is run from Uganda, and it's pipeline at the time work to reduce the
Edwin, we're having some difficulty hearing you. Can you try speaking closer to the mic? Edwin, do you want to try turning off your camera? It might help your connection.
Okay. How about now? Are you able to hear me?
That's much better, thank you.
Okay. Well, the ECOP is the East African crude oil pipeline that is running in Tanzania, and it's in the situation where countries are trying so hard to carbon emissions. Tanzania will to see that we extract the oil, and we believe that the pipeline will reduce of emissions, which is limit Uganda target towards the reduction of emissions. The emissions are expected for next, because that's when there is that the oil will be extinct from the ground. The pipeline will be 1,440 meters, which will transport the crude oil pipeline from Uganda to the port of Tanga. The pipeline also carries 10.9 metric tons at the production. This is a lot, and it will require power that in the power that is being generated. Yes. There are players in the ECOP campaign. These can include the financiers and the stakeholders. CNOC, and in addition, the governments of Uganda and Tanzania. They have played a great role in the implementation of the East African pipeline. The company formed. The company will be formed with above partners to as co-owners. That is the Uganda Petroleum Company, which is a government-led company in the production and transportation of oil through to Tanga. At the moment, the company has been formed and it's carrying out activities on behalf of other companies, and as the CR study been okay. The map is showing where the oil will be extracted, and the red line is the direction of the pipeline where the pipeline will pass. And if you can see clearly, the pipeline, when it reaches Tanzania, it passes near Lake Victoria, which is a worry to us as environment, because for only the East African crude oil pipeline is passing through 7 Ramsar sites, which is us because when you try to look at other pipelines, they have been characterized by spillovers. So we are trying to push for the government of Uganda to see if they can either abort the project or try to put in place safety measures onto how such cases will be controlled in case spillovers come in. As there has been interaction onto how the pipeline will be constructed, because it will have to go through such as one pipe, which is well known for pansies and other species which are among the items facing extinction. So we believe the pipeline will affect their production and the way they live.
Edwin, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm afraid the audio is very difficult. Your volume is good, but the connection keeps coming in and out. So it's very difficult to follow your input. I'm so sorry, but your slides are excellent. If you don't mind, I will ask your colleague and our colleague, Prince, if he could come in and summarize the last slides. Prince, if I might ask you to come in.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you so much, Edwin.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you, Karina. Thank you, Edwin, for that wonderful presentation. I just wanted to ask you to stop sharing a screen.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'll just help you out here because of the connection. Our translators are also having problem with hearing you. So I'll pick up from where Edwin left. He had shared this presentation with us. So one of the impacts that this crude oil is going to have is that already it has displaced a majority of the communities where the length of it, 1445 kilometers, is going to pass through. And the pipeline is passing also through Murchison Falls, which is a very big national park in Uganda, and also near Lake Albert. This is a water body. Families depending on fishing, families depending on its water, and nearby for farming are going to be displaced and impacted. We also look at the forest that the pipeline is going to demand that the forest being cleared. This includes various wetlands that supports the livelihoods of Ugandans. And 3, the farmland, at least 12,000 Ugandans and farmers have been confirmed that they are going to be displaced by this massive pipeline. And most of the areas where the route of this pipeline have been marked by IUCN, and they are listed. This area is listed as holding species that are really endangered. To the next slide, we see that there is the potential, the economic displacement of Ugandans so far. Some have been displaced, but no payment as of now. And even if that payment comes, as it has happened in various African countries, that payment never comes in. And rights abuses like women rights abuses in Uganda, land holding is majorly predominantly by men. So in case of compensation, the women are going to really suffer. There is no that compensation that's going to come to them, because land belongs to the male or the husbands, or who are the owners of these plots. And we see that there is going to be about 1.6 billion loss of tourism income once there is this clearing of forests and around Murchison Falls. And the water assets and the water, look at how the tributaries or the water sources, the catchment areas for water is going to also be impacted. And this, Uganda already has this water shortage, and this pipeline is going to destroy the remaining water sources that we have in the country. And look at Lake Victoria. Edwin mentioned that in case of a spill, recently in the past month, we saw a huge oil spill in Mauritius. And Lake Victoria, this lake serves the East African countries, and this is also the source of River Nile in Egypt. So a slight spill of the oil in this lake is going to affect millions of people. And if we look at also the life underwater in Lake Victoria, this is going to be very, very massive. And we look also at Uganda's emissions. The other presenter talked about the nationally determined contributions. This pipeline is going to include or increase up to 34.3 million metric tons per year of CO2 of Uganda. But Uganda is also a signatory to the Paris Agreement. Maybe we found out that, we realized from the past presentation that only 7 out of the massive number of signatories have submitted. Maybe Uganda is not amongst the 7. And challenges, some of the challenges that this the campaigners in Uganda have are repressive laws, intimidation. For example, a week ago or 2 weeks ago, a group of activists who are going to protest, peacefully protest against the encroachment of the ECOP and some sugarcane farming in Uganda were detained. 9 people were detained unlawfully, and 7 of them released without any charge. Just seeing that how this ECOP, once allowed to operate, what kind of the rights violations that we are going to see in that country. And several organizations, civil society organizations, have had their offices broken into, and they have been tarnished or tarnished by their names tarnished by the government as anti-development and things like that. And also, Uganda is now in an election period. We see how multinational oil corporations in Nigeria manipulate or interfere in elections. And this, we are going to see this also in Uganda, in Tanzania, and the East African region. So where we really need like a free and fair elections for this. And CSOs have done a lot this. Remember that ECOP oil was discovered in Uganda around 2006, but up to now, CSOs and activists like Edwin, they've looked at the ASEA. The ASEA has also been scrutinized and by reputable organizations, and there are massive gaps in this ASEA that was granted to Total. And so communities keep on mobilizing, disseminating information to those, the government spread this information about massive job opportunities, foreign earnings, but these are just on the paper. The common person is not going to see this. And so some of the activities that we have, for example, having these organizations consolidating a strong network, local network that is going to campaign against this pipeline. And one petition is already out, started by on Avast's website, asking the Total CEO to stop this madness in Uganda. And we are also calling for the Europeans. Please, this is Africa. If you need these projects, remember the topic of this webinar. If you need these projects, have them at home. Pope Francis' video, we see that he's saying that multinationals, European companies or foreign companies going to places, doing projects that they will not do into their own homes. So as Africans, as Ugandans, we also don't want this project by European companies into our own home. And this is a call that we strongly support. And up to there, thank you, Edwin. We are sorry that the connection will not allow you to do that. And we appreciate your help and participation today. Thank you so much. Back to you, Clina.
So much to Prince and to Edwin for that presentation, and I couldn't say it better than Prince said. The madness of what these European companies are trying to do and get away with in countries where the things that they could not get away with in their own country. This is new oil that is being brought up in East Africa. When Pope Francis gave a clear warning more than 2 years ago, expressing deep concern at the continued exploration for fossil fuels, when we know that the fossil fuels we already have must remain underground. So I think this is another example of the need for joined up responses to the COVID and the climate and ecological emergency. People in Uganda must be able to have decent jobs, but they must not be forced or distracted into these projects which will not benefit them and their families in the long term. So thank you so much to you both. I will beg our participants for your patience. We're going to run over by about 5 minutes so that we can have some time for questions and answers with our panelists. So I'm going to move on to ask 1 or 2 questions. Marcin, there was a question, an interesting question, which related to one of the points you made around sustainable employment. So what kind of, and particularly thinking about young people, what kind of jobs could you give as examples for sustainable employment, especially for young people? And if you don't mind, if I can ask the panelists to keep your responses to 1 minute, please. Thank you.
First of all, I was thinking about not the type of work, but rather a type of contract. So I would argue for fixed contract, not the flexibility of labor market, especially in the time of COVID pandemic. Because if you are in a quarantine because of the pandemic, then you are losing your job and you're losing your social security. So that is why I think that I believe that there is a pace for the new jobs, especially in the healthcare and in taking care of the children, or on the other hand of the elderly. But it's not a problem of money, or it's not a problem of demand. It's a problem of the construction of the labor market. So that, as I said, I would mostly argue for the regulation of the labor market and guaranteeing the fixed contracts, and somehow even financially supporting, as the European Union do now in the SURE program, that is paying additional money for companies that would like to defend their fixed contracts in terms of the huge instability in the economy.
Oh, thank you for that. And that I understand perfectly what you mean. That, and Sister Smirelli also referred to this. It's not just environmental sustainability, but economic and social sustainability and sustainable jobs, as you say. And Sister Smirelli's points around full employment speak to that. It's very interesting interconnections. And Lydia, if we might ask you, there were some questions around one of the recommendations that you made around the EU and mandatory due diligence. What is the key function of the new due diligence regulation? What will happen if it is put in place? If you could tell us very briefly.
Well, thank you so much for the question. Really, if this new regulation is put in place, this will ensure that countries really keep their promise and obligation under international law to protect human rights and ensure that communities are protected from corporate abuse, and ensure that this legislation makes it a point that any violation of human rights and damage to the environment is now becomes a crime throughout the supply chain. So this becomes very important that human rights becomes part of the core principles and value of this new legislation.
Thank you so much, Lydia, for that clear and succinct explanation. And finally, if I might, and Edwin, you might try coming in here because maybe it will work, and otherwise Prince can also support. There was a lot of interest and support for your presentation and interest in this project, this ECOP project. Could you reiterate again some of the actions that are coming up that people could get involved in to support your work against the ECOP project?
We have come up with several actions that are being taken place. So one of them is, the link has been shared by Papa, the petition by Avaz. Secondly, we are trying to involve governments and other CSOs to see how we can work together and try to put pressure onto government to see if it can reverse its decision, and if it can't reverse its decision, because basically our government side, the government of Uganda is going to invest in the ECOP using money borrowed from financials. So if it can't reverse all those decisions with borrowed money, then we are requesting them to put the best measures that will control tragedies that will be related to the ECOP project.
Thank you, Edwin. And you can be sure that, sorry, Prince, you might say something?
Can I just add a little thing? Is that already
very
in
briefly,
Uganda,
thank you.
Yeah, in Uganda, the Africa Institute of Energy Governance, AFIEGO in short, has challenged the ACR report in court. And also we have another court case going in France, filed by Friends of the Earth France, challenging Total's action in Uganda. Apart from that, GCCM, a Global Catholic Climate Movement, is working around mobilizing and looking for Catholic hierarchy voices in denouncing this project, and also mobilizing communities to say no to this project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prince. So I think if this project requires a lot of work, so there you can watch this space and keep an eye out for communications from us on this project and how you can get involved and support the work that Edwin and Prince are doing. So thank you so much for your patience, everyone. We're going to pass on to my colleague now from SIDSE, Chiara Martinelli, who's the senior advisor with SIDSE, and she's just going to offer a few words of reflection to wrap up our discussions here today.
Thank you, Kalina, and thanks everybody, and especially to the speakers. I will be super brief because I know that we don't have a lot of time. So I would like to offer to you 3 words that I will keep for me also as a summary of this amazing and inspiring debate. So the first word is interconnectedness, because I think across all the inputs, we got a very clear understanding that obviously we need to think about the whole globe, the whole planet, while we try to build a sustainable recovery also after the post-pandemic, as well as to address the climate emergency, but especially interconnectedness in the sense that both for our analysis and for the proposals and the solutions we put forward, we needed to think to the climate and the social agenda as a one agenda. We can't deal with one or the other without considering both. The second word I will give it to you is the European leadership and European responsibility, meaning I think we learn a lot today about how we all agree that Europe should lead by example, because there is an historical responsibility of the collapse of the system we see today, but also because there is a lot of opportunities. We saw many examples on how we can make this shift to happen, and responsibility in the sense that, yes, we need to keep calling for a stronger corporate regulation in order to avoid human rights violation and environmental degradation, especially in countries outside Europe. And third, I would like to, as a third word, I would like to offer you creative collaboration. I think one of the first speakers mentioned that, if I'm not wrong, was Marcin. And I think it's really about, we need to join forces. There were some questions like that, asking like why we are focusing so much on corporate regulation, why we don't think about ourselves. I believe we need both. So we really, if we really need and want to move forward, we need the bottom-up approach, join our forces, change our lifestyles, but we also need the stronger regulation. And I think we heard so many examples and inspiring thoughts on that regard. Thank you, Kalina.
Thank you so much, Chiara, for that wrap up. And yes, a really important point around personal responsibility as well. So during Season of Creation, we're thinking about our own actions and also thinking about raising our voice in the public space. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we wanted to use this webinar to both reflect and exchange, but also to provide you with some calls to action, some things that you can do for the remainder of Season of Creation to raise your voice. The first thing you can do relates to tomorrow. Tomorrow, 25th of September, is the next Global Climate Strike, Global Day of Action. If you don't have plans already, you can go to the Fridays for Future website, and there in both English, French and Spanish, they have tools, information, resources on how to take action online or in person tomorrow, according to your context. To raise your voice. And it's a really important way to be able to show decision makers that the climate emergency has not gone away, and that the people who care about it have not gone away. We'll move on to the next slide. The second call to action is that if you were inspired by Pope Francis's prayer petition and some of the issues shared by our speakers today, you can sign and share the Catholic petition for a just response to the COVID and climate emergency. This is a new petition launched just last week. It's available in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian. So please find it online, take the action, share it with your friends. It's a way for the global Catholic community to come together to raise their voice, to say that the current trajectory for the response to COVID and climate is not right, and it must change. And on to the final slide for our final call to action. The final thing you can do during this Season of Creation and beyond is to join the global Catholic fossil fuel divestment movement. Moving your investments away from fossil fuels and into climate and social solutions is one of the most prophetic things that Catholic institutions can do in response to the COVID and climate emergencies. And just in the last few months, the Vatican released a landmark document with guidelines, comprehensive guidelines for implementing Laudato Si. And in those guidelines, it included endorsement of divestment from fossil fuels for Catholic institutions. That's really important message coming from the Vatican. And you can invite your Catholic institution as appropriate to join the next Global Catholic Divestment announcement on the 18th of November. So you can see the details here. Please do contact us for more information on that and support. And now I invite Ana Paula to bring me on to our final slide. So I want to thank you all for being here today and for engaging with Season of Creation in so many different ways, in reflection, prayer and action. I want to thank Sidze for co-hosting today and speaking with us today. I want to thank all our speakers, Sister Smirelli, Marcin, Edwin, Lydia and Prince for being with us and giving us your time and your insights. I also want to thank all the team behind the scenes who make these webinars possible. It would not be possible without you. So finally, to bring us back into a quiet space, into a closing prayer to close our webinar, I'd like to bring us back to the Pope's prayer intention. For the season of creation, let us pray that the planet's resources will not be plundered, but shared in a just and respectful manner. No to plundering, yes to sharing. God bless you all and enjoy the rest of your season of creation.